Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Novice Advice. My name is Liam McKinnon. I am an actor and dungeon master here in the city of Edmonton, Alberta, and I'm here to talk to you about a very interesting subject for tabletop role-playing games, something that I've been thinking about a little bit as I begin to dive deeper into Vampire the Masquerade for the actual play series that I'm doing for YEG VMP, and also just kind of reflecting on my own history and finding things that I wanted to talk about that I think would be very useful to people who are either experienced in role-playing games, like kind of giving a little bit of reflection on something that we've either considered as community members and fellow gamers and not really talked about with other people, and also finding advice that I think would be very good for people who are brand new into tabletop role-playing games. We are going to be talking today about how you find an RPG system and an RPG game that is right for you. I think that a lot of people gravitate towards certain systems based on popularity or the overwhelming amount of content that is available for people to see and get an example of what certain game systems are like. But just because something is very popular does not mean it's necessarily the right fit for some people. And I don't know if any of you have ever experienced the trying to dive into something and feeling like it's not clicking, trying out a game or trying out like a new hobby, and something's just not clicking despite how much people rave about it and talk about it. And you start to feel like it's your fault, and you start to feel like there's something wrong with you, or you're doing something that isn't working. And at times it might even feel, based on your experiences, that people blame you for not understanding either the game or the point of it, and you start to feel stupid, and then you don't even want to touch the game anymore because the people in that community made you feel stupid. If that is happening to you, if you are experiencing that sensation and that feeling of just not being a part of this game and feeling like it's just you're feeling that pressure to have to understand it, I want you to know, first of all, you don't have to worry about that, and don't take that pressure off of your shoulders. It's okay if something is not clicking with you and it's just not working. That's one of the reasons I want to talk about this with you all, because tabletop role-playing games are a very deep investment. These are just a couple of the books I have, but there's an entire library that I've got, and it's not just investment of resources, it's an investment of time, it's an investment of just your attention and your focus, and at times your sanity. These games are wildly fun and entertaining, but they are work. And when they're not clicking with you and you're not receiving a connection, or when you feel like there is something that you are being told that a game is and you're just not getting it, like when you hear Dungeons and Dragons is a game that will allow you to do anything and you can explore your imagination, and your experience doesn't involve exploring your imagination and is just kind of stale by comparison of what you've heard, it can really turn you off of the game system. And then what I think is actually a really bad thing for tabletop games in general, as it is for any form of art or any kind of just any form of entertainment, it makes people then judge that form of entertainment and then write it off completely and shut themselves away from being imaginative and being creative. So I want to talk about exploring and finding an RPG or finding a game system for you through anecdotes of my own life. Because even though it is my job now to help teach people and coach them and to work with them in finding their tabletop gaming voice and to help work on healthy communication in tabletop gaming spaces, I will say that for a vast majority of my life, I never liked tabletop role-playing games. Specifically, I didn't like Dungeons and Dragons. This was the very first system I ever played. The Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game module, the game system that came out back in the late 70s. It was an edition that was owned by my late uncle. He taught it to me and my brother and my cousin, and we would play together when we were kids, and we only played about 4 or 5 sessions that I remember in my history of being a kid. And none of those memories are great necessarily. I said that my uncle taught us the system, and that's actually not true. I don't know how this system worked. I wasn't taught how it actually functioned. I barely knew how the dice actually worked. I didn't understand. When I started playing like tabletop games back in 2019, I didn't understand what a D20 was. I didn't understand what a 10-sided die or a 6-sided die really meant in the context of these games. It was a foreign concept to me because I never really understood this book. I bought this, or actually I was gifted this particular edition by my mom. Love you, Mom. This game is something that I'm learning again for myself because I want to revisit it and understand what didn't connect with me. However, I also know what didn't connect with me, and that was because I was promised a false sense of what we could do with this game. This is kind of a warning and a heads up for any game masters or any people out there who are wanting to sell tabletop role-playing games to people who are asking them, how do I get into this? Don't lead them with false promises about what the game could be. Instead, you should tell them exactly what the game is. If I'm talking to somebody about like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, I'm going to let them know that it's a game that is about high fantasy characters like elves, dwarves, humans, who take on the role of wizards and warriors to be able to go out and explore vast landscapes and adventures and to tell stories that focus on getting treasure, fighting great beasts that are like dragons or giants or even undead zombies, and creating a collaborative storytelling environment through that kind of game. If I want to take away the poeticness of collaborative storytelling, it's a space where we get together with friends and we get to fight monsters as fictionalized fantasy characters like humans, elves, and dwarves, and continuing on from what I had said before. Because I don't want people to go in with a false sense of expectation about what this is. If I lead in with what Dungeons and Dragons is, I'm just like, it's a collaborative storytelling experience. It is a tool used to unlock your inner youth and to plunge deep into the imaginative well that is improv. Then I'm automatically setting people up for a false sense of what this game actually is. One, we're not doing improvised theater here. We're sitting around a table, we're rolling dice to challenge fate. We're not just making up the scene as we go and going yes and to each other's ideas. There's like rules that we follow, and there's a system that helps govern those rules based on dice and the mechanics of our characters, like character class features and racial features, and our background informs us about our characters. There's all these different things that help inform us about what we can do. What we get to do is based on our own creativity about the tools that we have for our characters. I'll step away from Dungeons and Dragons and talk about something like Vampire the Masquerade. That's a game where when someone asks me, what is that system? It is a game where we play as monsters, where we are vampires in a city, like an actual modern day city or city of the past, and we play as vampires trying to figure out the complex political and social and like kind of power dynamics within our world of darkness. That's what that game is. It's structured to be we explore our cities or go through different encounters and scenarios, playing as powerful monsters, having to also keep our powers like hidden from other people due to something called the Masquerade. From my understanding of what the first edition like system of Dungeons and Dragons was, if someone was to ask me honestly, what is this game? I would say it's a game where you sit at a table and you have to use graph paper to basically construct a dungeon because you need to be paying attention to where you're traveling, and someone's going to tell you you're in a 3x2 like square room and there's a door to the north and the east side of you, so you have to have a compass on it, and you also can't play a majority of the classes that are available to you if you are not a human. It was fun at times. Like, for example, I really enjoyed being able to get together with my cousins and with my brother to be able to like do a bunch of silly stuff. Like, for example, we were one time going into a dungeon and there was this big giant cube that was made of acid, like a gelatinous cube coming at us, and I was like, let's set it on fire. So I decided to throw a flask of oil at it, and I was like, great, we'll get this thing covered in oil and then it will be set on fire. And then I rolled so badly on a die that I spilt oil all over myself, and my brother and cousins are waiting to throw this torch at this giant cube, and then I turn around in the game and I say, don't throw the fire, don't throw the fire, because I'm covered in oil and I don't want to immolate myself. That was one of the best memories I remember from that game, because again, the rest of the experiences were mainly focused on the idea of just tracking yourself through a dungeon that I didn't really understand. And what I loved about it, though, was when things got crazy, when things got really wild and unpredictable. I remember that. That was the thing I found. And from that experience, I realized what I liked. I liked unpredictability. And that was something I discovered through experimentation, through the discoveries of a system that, even though I didn't like it, I still found something that I did enjoy, and it just took some time to get there. One of the things I didn't like in the system was exactly how restrictive it was with the idea of what my imagination was being limited on. It was more about the dungeon master with my uncle in terms of his framing, and it was also about the setting for the game, which I also had a problem. We played in a setting called Greyhawk, and that's a setting that had some very like harsh circumstances when it came to like the racial differences and the way that there were like good and evil races within D&D, and I kind of had a problem with that. There was a situation that I'll share in another video that came up, but it just really made me feel like I didn't have agency about what I could do because I felt like it was getting in the way of other players. That's another really important thing for people who are game masters, who are telling people that are wanting to get into game systems. You should let them know about the setting or the genre of the experience that they are going to be going into, like kind of the general broad strokes. Like, again, Dungeons and Dragons is a fantasy setting. Vampire the Masquerade is a gothic horror and political setting. There's other like science fiction RPGs or Wild West RPGs or action RPGs. A big thing about these games is that they usually have a inherent setting for their system that the game mechanics are kind of designed to help navigate players through. Like, the World of Darkness setting is not the same setting as Dungeons and Dragons. And Dungeons and Dragons is actually not the same setting as another game that I'm going to talk about in a second called Chill. These games are very different and very unique in terms of their systems, and the systems that they use help to telegraph the ways in which players can navigate, the tools that are at their disposal, and the kind of imagination that the games really inspire or want the players to be inspired to explore. So that's something you have to ask yourself. What kind of genres do I want to be a part of? What kind of stories do I want to, tell? What kind of, world do I want to be invested in for hours of my time? And that's another question you have to ask. How much time do you want to invest in this? Like, yes, Dungeons and Dragons is a very popular game system, but it's also a game with a lot of rules and a lot of different books. You have to ask yourself, well, how much time do I want to put into this? Do I want to put in like a weekend? Is it a one-shot game that I'm going to be doing, which is usually just like a single session that can be like 3 to even 8 hours if you're lucky? That sounds like a dream for me. But you can also ask yourself, am I going to be doing this for a year? Am I going to do this for like a school club? How much time can I invest? And who do I know that I could invest time with? Is there a way for me to share in this experience with other people? That's another question. Why do you want to play this game? I can honestly let you know why I played early edition of Dungeons and Dragons and Chill, and then why I got into 5th edition D&D as well. The reason was because I wanted to spend time with my uncle. It was because I wanted to connect with him on a more personal level. That was the motivator. That was why I wanted to do it. It wasn't because I wanted to tell stories and get involved in this. It was because I wanted to connect with my family, for goodness sakes. I brought up chill here for a moment, and I want to keep talking about this particular system on this subject, because when I had only played about 5 editions of Dungeons and Dragons, I realized it just wasn't for me, and it was causing more tensions at in our family table and dynamics, and it just wasn't fun. So my uncle actually had a solution. He introduced 2 different role-playing games to me and my brother. He introduced a game called Villains and Vigilantes to my brother, and he introduced Chill to me. This is a game from 1986. It's discontinued, and there were 2 different editions that came out. I love this system for a lot of reasons that I'll get into, but it's also a flawed system, I will definitely say. It was very racist, and it was also very problematic in the depictions of First Nations culture as well as Chinese culture as well. It was very problematic. What I did like about the system is the mechanics that were on display for the genre and the theme that it was based on. They want you to feel like hunting a vampire is a significant thing. It's not about the idea that, oh, I'm gonna deal radiant damage and I'll put a stake through its heart and that will be the end of it. Chill was a system that was designed for you to make characters that weren't like combat heavy players, but were investigators. And that was what I was really interested in. Dungeons and Dragons was a combat simulation, and do not get me wrong, I love combat games. 2 of my favorite games growing up were Hero Quest, and still my favorite board game of all time is Heroscape. Those are combat simulation games, absolutely, and they are heavily tied to fantasy. In Heroscape, you can play as World War II soldiers that fight alongside ninjas to take down a giant, a cyclops, a dragon, and then some elf wizard. And I want to do that. I want to play that kind of crazy, interesting scenario and think about this really awesome world with all these cool winged creatures. But that also has like a time and a place for me. And it gets me a different kind of element of like gameplay and investment. But for me, what I really wanted to do was be a part of a character that had to problem solve. And in a combat game like Heroscape or Hero Quest, a lot of the times it just came down to, do you got a big stick? And how big did that stick gotta be? In a game like this, the way that it's structured is you can take on something like, you could be a boxer, you can be trained in skills like flintlock pistols or even like revolvers, automatic weapons, but you also have stuff that is like knowledge in antiques, in biology, in forensics, in, I believe, let me actually just look at one right off the top of my head because the game was crazy, in contemporary languages, and then in ancient languages, and then also in journalism or photography. The game was structured on you finding very specific skills for your particular investigator and getting you to really understand the intricacies of the monsters that you were hunting. And the way that the game worked in terms of its system was that there was a chart on the back. With this chart, you basically rolled percentile dice, which is like 2d10s, and then you look at the score that you had on your character sheet, you roll your dice, and then you subtract what your score is based on what you rolled. That was how the system worked, and I thought that was actually really ingenious. What's also really cool is that this game taught me a lot about consequences and a lot about the severity that certain monsters have. What's really interesting is that these charts do scale up and scale down based on certain difficulties, but the results do not change. For example, if I was to get a critical wound from a monster in like, I don't know, like that was like pretty high difficulty, that's awful, and I'm gonna lose anywhere from 6 to 60 hit points. And that can happen with the lowest level monster. Like a dog could bite me and inflict a critical wound, causing me to start bleeding out all of a sudden. Or a ghost could do the same kind of critical wound and literally suck my soul out of my body. That was entirely possible in this game, and it's why I loved it. It was the thing that got me excited. I wanted to play characters who were struggling, characters who had to fight monsters, but were on like a knife's edge when it came to going into the haunted house. I wanted to feel tension in every single moment. And I wanted to know that if I didn't properly write down research details, that I was putting my life into my own hands. That's what I got out of this game, and it's why I loved it. And it's why when my uncle had passed away, I played that game with my family, and it was my first time game mastering. That was the system. It wasn't Dungeons and Dragons. It was something that I was passionate about and that I was passionate to share with other people. That's what got me into Dungeons and Dragons later. I developed a passion for this system. I will let you know, though, that passion didn't just come from, the popularity of it. It came from me actually saying, what do I like about the game? For example, the Player's Handbook for 5th edition did not inspire me when it came to Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't know what this was. It's a giant. That's not a dungeon or a dragon. So I didn't understand what this was here. It didn't interest me in the least. I wasn't excited. I was like, cool. What got me excited was the monster manual. And then I recognized what I liked about this particular system was the monsters. I like monsters. And it took me back to way back in the day of Dungeons and Dragons, the early adventure. We were a bunch of humans or a bunch of dudes going around, just a bunch of normies. And then I was like, wait a second. I could be a little dragon monster. I could be a bird that can't use its own voice. I could be a lizard. Holy cow, that's awesome. And that's what I wanted. And as a game master, I wanted to know what these creatures were. When I'm doing YEG D&D, our improv show for Sorry Not Sorry, the first thing that helps me get inspired when I'm game mastering for an entire audience of people is asking them, what is a monster that would inspire this story? Because monsters make the game for me. Whether it's an angel or a demon, I am invested in that story. Once you find a system, ask yourself what it is you want to explore for yourself. Is this a system that allows me to explore elements that I never even considered of my own interest? Do I get to develop a hobby? Do I get to develop a passion for something that didn't exist before? Or, as stated before, do I get to bolster a passion and really find what I love about it? Dungeons and Dragons is a great system. I really do love 5th edition, but I also acknowledge that there was something missing in it for me. What got me interested in Dungeons and Dragons, the full history of it, it wasn't the original handbook. It was this book, The Book of Vile Darkness from the 3rd edition of Dungeons and Dragons. This book, when I read parts of it, made me cry because it was intense in terms of its content. It's dark, and I remember seeing this book when I was living in Calgary. There was a guy who was doing photo printed minis. It was making cheap resin minis, and it was I could go to the mall and get these things made, and it was so cool. And they showed me this book, and it was the coolest thing. And I saw the price, and it was so expensive. I thought I would never find it, but then I did, and I got it the instant I found it, and I started diving deep into the darkest parts of what is possible in Dungeons and Dragons, because that's something I discovered about myself too. I really love horror games. I really like games that put you in those tense circumstances and make you really question a lot about survival and your own humanity, and have to make you ask the question of how far can I go, and what is the limit of my own existence and my own capabilities, and can I survive? And if I do survive, what do I do with that time? That's what I discovered I loved. See, finding a role-playing system or finding a role-playing game that works for you, it's not just about finding comfortability. It's not just finding your own creative voice. It's about finding you and finding who you are and finding what your interests are. Because I don't know if you guys feel the same way that I did when I was a kid, but I didn't know who I was for a time. I thought I was a very angry person, and I was kind of uncomfortable and awkward in my skin, and I felt very, very off, and I didn't really like who I was. And what I really loved later in my life, when I discovered what I did like about myself, I recognized that it was through exploring these different game systems. I found that what I really love is kind of the same thing I loved when I was like really into like movies and movie criticism and movie analysis. I love analyzing different game systems and seeing what works and what doesn't. So even the chase of finding a game system was interesting for me. Experimentation, like finding what works and what doesn't, is a big part of finding an RPG system. Like going to one-shot events at your local gaming store, meeting up with friends who you trust and being like, hey, can I get involved in this? Like maybe asking like, places like a local library, or just seeing if there are local clubs around, or even like big live events, like something like Critical Role does, or Dimension 20, or even just seeing like improv groups like Sorry Not Sorry, or other ones like Rapid Fire Theater here in Edmonton as well. They have shows that are focused on talking about Dungeons and Dragons, or focusing on giving you a sense of what these games can be like. And it can open a fascination, and that fascination can lead to like a good obsession. And that obsession begins to like tie into you asking yourself, well, why am I obsessed? And why do I like this so much? And then you start to actually discover more about who you are and what you like about yourself. It's kind of cool, and it's really what I enjoy doing, but also what I like opening others up to. It's why I have no hesitation these days in going out to a bar and just talking to people nonstop about Dungeons and Dragons. I wear a dragon pin that I got, and I have that, and people say, that's a cool pin. Why do you have that? I'm saying, well, I'm a D&D nerd, and I really love fantasy role-playing games, and I also really like tabletop role-playing games. And that starts a conversation, and then people talk about their own interests or their own experiences with it. And that's, for me, what I love. That's the engagement for me, and that's why this particular subject is something that I care about. But sometimes even with that, passion can only do so much, and sometimes we're just not able to really grab onto something. Sometimes it doesn't click. Sometimes it just doesn't hit us. And again, we go back to that place of like, well, is it me? Is this something I can't be a part of? And am I the problem? Well, no, because like I said, maybe you really wanted that fantasy experience and you want to do whatever it is you can. You want to explore a dungeon, and you want to meet people that, you want to be pushed to the limits of your own sanity maybe. But maybe Dungeons and Dragons doesn't provide that for you. Maybe the 5th edition or even the newest edition of Dungeons and Dragons, maybe that doesn't do it for you either. Maybe something like Call of Cthulhu would, or maybe something like a new RPG that I'm playing called Traverse, which is all about space exploration. It's a science fiction RPG that is very heavy when it comes to like item listing and inventory like categorizing, but it's also a game that focuses on combat simulation, similar to something like XCOM, which I am a huge fan of. But that kind of game can also be really intense, and sometimes people don't gravitate towards that. And then maybe they want the simple rule settings of like Vampire the Masquerade, where it's like all focused on storytelling, where your dice don't like add up with tremendous amounts of math. It's just simply, did you succeed or did you fail? And those levels of success can be charted. Similar to Chill, but a little less like on that element of like every single tier list. Like there was a mild success, a high success, a critical success, and then there was like a slight success. Like maybe you don't like that idea and you just want the simple cut and dry, did I do it or did I not? Or maybe you don't want to invest the time in it. And maybe you have discovered that and it's okay that you didn't want to go deeper, and maybe it's hard to discover that, but it's just, again, you finding more out about yourself, because that's what we want to do. We want to learn more about ourselves in this process. And I want to let everybody know, if you have friends who have been a part of these games but just realized it wasn't for them, it's not a sad thing. It's actually a good thing, because that person is discovering more about themselves, and you're discovering something really about your friend that is really important. And you should embrace that. You should embrace your friends in a big old hug or high fives, or just like a good for you. Whatever they feel is necessary for them to actually feel comfortable in their own skin, because that's what we want. We want healthy engagement with a community, and we want to understand our community more. So in order to do that, we have to give the options and put them out there. And if they don't connect with them, that's okay. A really big part about this too, in finding a system, is finding people who will teach you these games. Because if you can't invest time into it and study these systems, I highly recommend you do study the systems. That's very important. I personally would not be able to do or participate in any of these games if I didn't at least take the time to learn the basics of the game system myself. But if you can't do that and it's just not how you work, then I think what you should do is find people who are willing to do that and teach you. And we'll talk about the idea of finding proper influences, or finding healthy and helpful people, and trying to actually impart knowledge onto other people and sharing good advice and bad advice. But finding people that are willing to talk to you or just are interested in this, and actually asking or saying it to just your friends. Again, opening up that space in the living room and saying, hey, I've heard about this game and I'm kind of interested in being a part of it. And meeting those people with encouragement and saying, that's kind of cool. And maybe they have no interest, or maybe they do, but at the end of the day, it's still going to be an interesting experience. And I think that's something to relish in. One of the things that tabletop role-playing games and tabletop gaming in general that I've loved is it's become a hobby, and it's deepened my passion in finding my interests and my own unique personalities and quirks, the things that I love, the things I don't love, what I really like to pursue and experience in games. And I can tell you, even going back to that time of when I spilt oil all over myself, I remember so many of the experiences I had with every one of these tabletop games and these board games, everything. These are lasting memories that stay with you. And when you find one that resonates with you so perfectly, it's a beautiful feeling. It's honestly one of the best awakenings you can have for yourself. I love remembering when I first discovered how it felt when I was sneaking into a dungeon and discovering there was a vampire inside of a coffin and we had to escape or we were gonna die. That sensation was horrifying, and I actually felt like I was there. For all the faults that I remember of those games, I discovered something that I love about myself. The thrill of being someone that actually can take charge and take control of circumstances that feel out of my control. And it carries over even to this day. It was a journey, and it still is a journey. I'm still learning a lot about these kinds of games, but it's a journey worth taking. It's a journey worth exploring and investing time into, and you may find some roadblocks. Not every moment of my walk-in stories, every time I went into a gaming store was perfect. Not every game with friends was perfect. I've lost some friendships because of certain gaming experiences. But that's going to be a talk for another time. For now, in your novice adventures, take the time to explore and find the things you love. Because, again, you don't have to be a novice to know that when you find something that really resonates with you, that's something you want to hold on to for the rest of your life. And I hope you do. And I thank you all so much for watching this video. If you guys like, I'm going to be posting up more novice advice in the future. And I've just started uploading videos for the YEG VMP actual play game, where we're actually playing Vampire the Masquerade. I'm with my friends Sammy, Cordell, and Monica. I'm very excited about that. And coming up on April the 11th, I'm going to be a part of a professional Dungeon Master experience where we're doing Mithril Top Chef, where we're going to be working with the Waffle Bird and Evil Anvil, where we're going to basically be the Dungeon Masters for tables that are trying to be teams that help in a cooking competition. You can actually sign up for that. I'm going to put a link in where you can purchase tickets to be a part of it if you are in the Edmonton area and you'd like to be a part of it. Who knows? You could even be part of my table, and I'd love to have you there. So thank you all so much, and I'm going to see you again behind the screen real soon. Take care, everyone.